I would guess that probably most of the people in here could give the lecture on the minimum wage. So I hope I have a few things for you that you haven't seen before, or ways to explain things that you're not aware of. I do 6 telling questions, and I can't decide which one is the most telling. I'll let you tell me about that. Start off with just some numbers just to get our feet wet and see what it's all about. And I'll put up here a table on the official poverty levels for households, depending on whether 1, 2, 3, or 4 people in it. And so you can see the annual income. If you're below that, you're below the poverty line. Now, it turns out that until this recent 3-phase increase, the minimum wage was $5.15 an hour. That's from 97 to 07. And people who are proponents of the minimum wage, some of them at least, take a mathematical approach to defending their position. They have a pretty unsophisticated mathematical approach, and then one that's actually more sophisticated. So I want to present both of them, and let you be the judge. So first, if you take the 515, and you have to do a little math here if anybody's got a calculator, you multiply it by 40, that's work week, hours in the work week, and multiply that by 52, that's weeks in a year, and you get 10,712. Well, that's below the poverty line even for one person if 515 were still in force in 2009. Okay. And then at a higher wage rate, say 725, you do the same math, same multiply by 40, multiply by 52, and you get $15,080. And you can see that, hey, that's above the poverty line, both for the single person and even for the 2-person households that's only counting on one person working for the minimum wage. So that's a mathematical approach. Now, that's the sophisticated approach. I want to show you the other one now. Okay. So the less sophisticated approach takes, you can do math without the calculator. You take 2007 and subtract 1997, and you get 10 years. So then you go to the conclusion, isn't it about time to increase the minimum wage, you see? And that's the approach that I remember when they had the presidential debate. And Lou Dobbs was a moderator, and he was going to ask unbiased questions. But his question was, isn't it time, it's been 10 years, isn't it time to increase the minimum wage? Okay. Okay, well, let's look at the issues very briefly. If you've taken a course, basic course in micro, you sort of know what they are. The issues are intentions versus consequences. I'm going to do this 4 ways, but really they're all the same thing almost. Rhetoric versus reality. Listen to the political rhetoric and realize it's not the same as the reality. Caring versus thinking. I tell my sophomores that they could have care squirting out both ears, and they'll do a lot of damage to people if they don't think as well. And politics versus economics. Well, I've lined them up where it's all those left side phrases that get contrasted with the right side phrases. And in fact, on any of them, but especially say intentions versus consequences, I've become sensitized to the use in modern political debate, especially about something like the minimum wage. With the issue of greed. Okay, you hear a lot about greed. And from a politician's point of view, especially if you take somebody like Pelosi or Harry Reid or somebody, where, economics is to them what color is to a cat. I mean, they're, Fluffy's colorblind. And if they see things happening that don't square with their intentions, they attribute it to greed. So a good measure of greed from that political perspective is simply intentions minus consequences. Okay. That disparity gets attributed to greed. Okay, well, let me start with a little red meat and look at what some of the politicians have said about minimum wage. This is from the 2000 presidential convention. We will honor hard work by raising the minimum wage. He got wild applause about this. He didn't mention that it doesn't cover everybody, and there's some people that just don't need to be honored, I guess. In fact, they turned out being dishonored. And he also didn't explain just how much honor there is in $7.25. I'm not sure about that. If we can have trillions of dollars of tax cuts for the wealthiest people, we can fight for a raise in the minimum wage. Okay. Again, more applause. That's a speech he made in Baltimore, I think, while he was running for president. She says it's past time to stand up for the working families and raise the minimum wage. That could have two different meanings, I think, but I think she wants to raise the minimum wage. Anybody else? Raising the minimum wage to $9.50 by 2012 is one of the most important steps we can take to lift the working families out of poverty and into the middle class. Now, all these things, they sell well in the political arena among leftist politics, as you well know. The statements to the contrary are fairly muted. Linda Chavez, does anybody recognize her? She was named Secretary of Labor, chosen for Labor Secretary by the elder Bush, and was never confirmed. She was run out of town, and partly, I suspect, because of her position on minimum wage. But I like her picture because I can't imagine a picture of someone that looks more caring. Did you ever see any more? She looks like somebody's mother, okay? She really cares. And yet she does not believe in a minimum wage. She does not believe in it. Okay, we need to figure out why she doesn't believe in it. And a picture that I showed last hour in a different setting here. This is the Bush administration. He was Council Economic Advisor Chairman. We believe that a legislated minimum wage is a poorly targeted anti-poverty device. Well, it is. I mean, it's a bit of an understatement. Now, let's take a look at what's happened to the federal minimum. It came in 1938 as part of the New Deal. The big, the push for minimum wage was by the then Labor Secretary Frances Perkins. That was one of her big things coming in, and that's what she pushed for and got. And it started out at $0.25 an hour minimum wage, and it's increased, as you can see. Until 97, it was increased to $5.15. No, it's not. In fact, that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to adjust it for price inflation. So that's just the nominal minimum wage. But if you look at what happened to prices, and I say between 38 and 2000, I'm using 2000 because this was part of the graphics that came out, you can find on the web, relative to the 2000 race for the presidency, and the prices on average rose by a factor of 12. And so if you take this curve and fold it into the other one to see what the real minimum was, it goes like this. Okay, it crosses at 2000 because that's the index equals 100 mark, and it peaks, as you can see, in 68. This is in $2,000, and so $8, if you adjust that to current dollars, is $10. Okay, and so that's the highest in real terms that has been, and come down ever since. But what you can see is that the pattern is clear, that the minimum wage gets increased by legislation and then eroded by inflation. That's just the sequence that has gone on from the beginning. Okay. Now let's just do some real basic analytics and realize there's a supply of labor and there's a demand for labor. Have their conventional shapes. I can get through this part pretty quickly. The total income earned by unskilled workers is just W times N, the wage rate times the number of worker hours. And I'll label that by letting Y represent income, because it's not that economists can't spell income. A lot of them can't spell very well, but capital I means investment and lowercase I means interest. So, okay, Y turns out to be income. And the income, of course, is earned by these low-skilled, many entry-level workers as a group is just the area of that rectangle, okay? W times N. We'll have occasion to refer to that as we go along. Suppose the market wage is $5, all right? It might be. In fact, the 515 in 97, very, very little unemployment was attributed to that minimum wage, which of course was one of the arguments in favor of raising it. That's used, it's not creating unemployment, so it must be too low. Get it on up there. Evidence that it's not having its effect. And now let a legislated minimum wage of $7 apply. Of course, that doesn't mean everybody will get a raise, as the math suggested and I did a while ago. It just stipulates that hiring at anything below that is illegal. Okay? And so you have to ask how many workers would firms hire. And of course, that's determined by demand. So you can see that, yes, there's a gain in dollars per hour, but there's a loss in hours. And in fact, quite a few people want to supply their labor at that rate. And the difference is dictated by something called Marshall's dictum. That's Alfred Marshall. And he said it a little bit cryptically, not all that cryptically. Trade, he said, he just meant buying and selling. Trade is governed by the short side of the market. In other words, you have to have both a supplier and a demander. So it's the demand side there that governs the market. And the difference is a surplus, that's a generic term. With labor, it's called unemployment. Okay, you all know about this. This is just a micro of the minimum wage, very simplistically. Now, one thing I can point out that I think is worth pointing out is that very little, if any, of that unemployment shows up in the official BLS statistics. So when you look at the 9.5% unemployment and you ask, well, how much of that is attributable to the minimum wage, there'll be virtually none of it. And it's not because this graph is wrong. It's not wrong. It's right. Okay? But it's because of the way that the BLS defines unemployment. And that is that if you are unemployed, if you A, don't have a job, and B, you're looking for a job. All right? Now, when the minimum wage is initially implemented, then you will have some people in that category. They lost their job and they're looking for something else, so they're unemployed. But once the minimum wage has been at that level for a while, then those people don't look. In other words, they may be unskilled, but they're not stupid. Okay? They're not stupid. They don't continue looking for a job that no longer exists because they were eliminated by the minimum wage. So people who are simply not in the labor force because legislation won't let them sell their labor at a price that they could command are counted as not in the labor force. They're not counted as unemployed. Right? And further, as we'll see further down the line, that some people that do get hurt very badly by minimum wage, they are employed, but they're employed in areas where they're earning even less than they would earn had it not been for the minimum wage. I'm anticipating arguments to come. So establishing the price floor just eliminates many entry-level jobs. And I like the quote from Thomas Sowell, I paraphrase here, author of Race and Economics. Minimum wage cuts off the bottom rung of the economic ladder. Okay, so in other words, short run, yes, it has detrimental effects. Long run, very detrimental effects because would-be entry-level workers don't get entry. And that means they don't develop job skills. And that means they become burdens on their family or on society in one form or another. Now, if you look at the diagram, and you see this in a lot of principles texts, they'll say, well, you know, it's a mixed bag. Some people gain and some people lose. Some people get their wage rate goes from $5.15 to $7.25 or whatever it is. But other people lose their jobs. Okay, well, you know, what's the net benefit there? And it turns out if you look at the pattern of who it hurts and who it helps, you find that it hurts the very people it's intended to help. and helps the people it's not intended to help. And let me show you some categories here. I'm going to look at those people that actually keep their jobs or that get jobs, that come out of idleness and start working. You see, once this is imposed, people representing this part of the supply curve up here now want jobs. And those people may well, many of them are better qualified to take jobs. They just didn't want them before because the wage was so low. But now they're qualified to take jobs, and so they'll take them at the expense of somebody who did have a job and very much needed it. Okay, so people that do get the jobs tend to be secondary and part-time workers in multi-income families. They tend to be entry-level workers with clear potential for advancement. In other words, okay, a firm can hire this person now, even if minimum wage overpays him a little bit, but if they can keep that worker on the job, they see potential where soon enough he will more than earn, or she will more than earn the minimum wage and start getting raises. Or young workers from working class households, and here I mean households that instill good habits, and the children coming out of that environment would be potentials for employment here. While the other people, the people that become unemployed or outside the labor force, are just the opposite. Okay, there would be workers from the lowest income families, victims of gender, race, and age discrimination, despite legislation, single parents with young children who are going to be absent a lot, and so on. So it hurts the very people who it's intended to help. That was part of the conclusion of a study done by the Joint Economic Committee, the JEC, when the wage rate in 97 was increased to its then $5.15. So minimum wage is an inverse Robin Hood. It redistributes income from the lowest income families, the most needy, and so on, to the higher income families. Not to high income families, at least not in this part of the analysis, but higher income families. For those most in need of getting a foothold in the marketplace, the minimum wage rate cuts off a few rungs of the labor market ladder. And for my sophomores, I left this in here. Got on Google and found the labor market ladder. Okay, there it is. And there's the labor, okay? The idea is that if you can get your foot on that bottom rung, then you can start climbing. Okay, that's the idea. And you end up with a semi-skilled wage rate with on-the-job training, okay? But if you have a minimum wage, then it's going to cut those rungs off the ladder, okay? Like so. And that does away with the worker. We're very sorry. Joining the unemployment lines. This is a cartoon that was in one of the national papers. I've forgotten whether it was Times or Wall Street Journal. But it seems like that, that is widely known. I mean, it's supposed to be funny, but it's too true to be funny, isn't it? Compassion, and so we've raised the minimum wage. Well, okay. How are you going to get the job? So if you just want to look at the three-stepper here, we've gone from $5.15, you get 70-cent increases once a year. This is the first time I've tried to verify this, but this is the first time this wage increase that occurred a week ago today. First time that minimum wage has been raised during a recession. Okay, not a good time to raise the minimum wage. If you look at the maximum minimum wage, which really was $1.60 in 1968, but the equivalent of $10 today. That was the high point that created the most unemployment. And in fact, that was the period, just to get anecdotal with you for a minute, that was the period when self-service gas stations came into being. That in the early 60s, there was no self-service gas station. There just weren't. You drive in the gas station and the attendant comes out and pumps your gas. In fact, if you got out of your car and you started taking the handle off somebody be running out there yelling at you, who do you think you are? What are you doing? Get back in your car. Well, they were friendlier than that, actually. They pumped your gas, washed them. Hey, I was one of those people, that was my first job. Pump your gas, check your tires, wash your window, check your oil, and so on. That's the way it worked. And one of the consequences of that high minimum, effectively $10 in today's money, was to cause service stations to opt for an alternative, not hire those people, and instead go to self-service, which in effect they were hiring the driver, hiring the car owner. So there was an implicit wage you were earning when you got out of your car and did the work of the attendant. You were working at a rate that was effectively less than minimum wage. But you typically didn't get put in jail for that, nor did the employer, which is only an implicit employer in any case. You could even ask yourself, why is it, this is a good essay question on an exam, why is it that in modern days people pump their own gas, whereas in the early 60s nobody pumped his own gas? Why is that? And you could say, it's just a cultural change. People just like to feel at one with their car, Is that right? No. It's because you've got minimum wage. And of course, there's a ratchet effect in the sense that once they go to self-serve, you spend a lot of money, a lot of upfront costs in going to self-serve. They don't go back. So even when the wage rate in real terms comes down, that doesn't mean they trash all of their electronics and all of their self-serve equipment and so on. No. Those jobs just are gone forever. I finally got to a telling question, which is the obvious question. Is raising the minimum, if raising the minimum wage to $7.25 is a good thing, why wouldn't raising it to $10 be better, or $20 or $50 better still? And of course, the answer is that independent of past levels, and I put this in here because in 2000, people were arguing in terms of what the minimum wage used to be. It used to be this high in purchasing power, as if that was a good argument for making it that high now. But independent of those levels, the wage rate will be accompanied by unemployment. The higher the minimum, the greater the unemployment. Me says, bless his heart, he never drew a graph in his life as far as I know. It's fine. We love him anyhow. But he tells us if wage rates, either by union pressure and compulsion or by government decree, are raised above the market rate, lasting unemployment of part of the potential labor force develops. Almost sounds like an understatement, but that's it. That's the story. Now, just to look at the current period and the movement of the consumer price index, we see that this is the biggest deflation, if you call it, price deflation we've seen lately. The Austrians, certainly judged by earlier speakers and in my own view, think that the ultimate problem we're going to have in the near future, or at least intermediate future, is going to be inflation, not deflation, with bank reserves as high as they are and government borrowing as high as it is, likely to have inflation, a lot of it. But in the past year or so, we've had actually a fall in the consumer price index. Probably not a fall in the overall price index if you add in asset prices and so on. And I want to contrast this with this three-step increase in the minimum wage. It starts in 07, there's 08 and 09, and between the second and third increase, we actually had prices fall by, it turns out, 2.5 or 2.2%, I think it was, which means in real terms, the 70% increase translated into a raise of 13%, okay, about 10.8 just for the nominal raise, and another 2.2 for a fall in the CPI. That's something that's going to have an effect in a depressed economy, right? That's not good, to say the least. Telling question number 2, why doesn't the minimum wage legislation specify a minimum total annual income for workers in addition to the minimum hourly wage rate? In other words, why not go right to the intentions and say, we just want these people to get more income. Let's pass a law that says they have to get so much. And of course, that's where the politicians can't repeal the laws of economics, which is the answer to that question. So you can't repeal supply and demand. It can enforce a minimum wage, but barring an outright socialization of labor markets, which of course could happen, I suppose, it has no way of controlling how many, if any, minimum wage workers are actually hired, or whether they're hired on a full-time or part-time basis. So here what we look at is the total income, and we can see that total income may go up, down, or stay the same. It depends on the elasticity of the demand for labor. But the way I've drawn it here, what you see is that total income falls some because there's not as many people working. It rises some because the people working are making more. But as time goes by, that demand curve becomes more elastic. This is in Alfred Marshall's principles. The more time that firms have to adjust to a higher minimum wage, the more ways they can think of as using capital instead of labor, or using labor more efficiently. And so in time, that demand curve will become more elastic, look something like that, and as a result, income paid to unskilled workers, entry-level workers, will fall. Okay? In other words, the total payment to these people is less than it was before we had the minimum wage legislation. That's just the nature of allowing firms time to make that adjustment. Telling question number 3, why doesn't the minimum wage legislation apply to farm labor as well as to non-farm labor? Now, that part of the legislation has changed over the years. It turns out when it was initially implemented, it just excluded farm labor. You don't have to pay farm laborers minimum wage. But in recent years, if it's a so-called corporate farm, which really is measured by the size of the farm and number of people working, if it's a corporate farm, yeah, it has to pay minimum wage. If it's a family farm or a small farm or whatever, it doesn't have to pay minimum wage. Okay? So it works that way. But we have to ask why. Well, why not? Why didn't everybody have to get minimum wage? Why don't babysitters have to get minimum wage? You know, why is that? And we can see how every once in a while it turns out that economic reality will hit the politicians over the head. Another way of asking the question, if we raise the minimum wage to honor hard work, shouldn't we make sure that we honor hard work done on the country's farms? You know, why don't we want to honor those people? And here, I'm just changing the diagram to represent non-farm workers. And I'll separately represent farm workers. And we can do that over here just by another supply and demand curve. But what do you guess about the average market price for farm work? Well, it's quite a bit lower than wage rate off the farm. It looks like that, okay? And the politicians have figured out not just to extend wholesale that minimum wage off the farm to the farm. If they did, they would create a tremendous amount of unemployment on the farm. Okay, it would be a pretty dramatic and pretty immediate effect. And so the way they solve that is they just don't extend it. You know, just leave the farm alone. There, fix that problem. Okay, but not only you avoided the unemployment, but actually you end up driving down the wage rate for farm workers. And well, how so? Well, because look at all these people over here that are unemployed. They got to go somewhere. Okay, some will go on welfare, some will just be burdens to their families, but most of them want to work. Most of them want to get their foot on that bottom rung. And one place they can work legally is the farm. All right? Which of course shows up over here as an increase in supply of farm workers. And an increase in supply is going to drive down the wage rate. So one of the consequences of minimum wage is it drives down the wage rate of the very lowest workers, namely farm workers. So some of the gains made by those minimum wage workers are gained at the expense of the farm workers. Not exactly justice in economic terms. I might mention here another factor that I could have mentioned earlier, but I didn't. Even when you look at the gain that some people make with the minimum wage, that vertical distance overstates it, because a number of economists have pointed out that your monetary pay is only one form of the compensation. There are all other sorts of aspects of the contract in labor, fringe benefits or working conditions, or how many breaks you get, or how long your lunch period is, this sort of thing. And firms will make adjustments in one direction if they can't make it in another. So if they have to increase your pay in terms of money they give you, they may decrease it in terms of fringe benefits or in terms of spending a little money to make the work conditions more pleasant and that sort of thing. Telling question number 4. Given all the perverse consequences of the minimum wage, why do most all workers, skilled and unskilled, and especially labor unions, support raising the minimum wage? Why do the very people, why you have this support? In fact, I think it says something here about union members already earn a lot more than the minimum wage, don't they? In other words, and yet you see the unions are one of the strongest supporters of the minimum wage. Okay? They make a whole lot more than that. Why is that? Well, again, we can answer that question by using unskilled labor. Of course, that's people who are affected directly by minimum wage, and looking at unions and skilled workers. And what do you know about the wage rate they're earning already? Well, it's already higher than the minimum, isn't it? And so skilled labor has a supply and demand. I've shown it $10 an hour is actually higher than that if you look at the average, but I'm just trying to keep this all on the screen. I don't want to go above just so I show it as higher. I'm in good shape. And of course, the minimum wage is $7.25. You see, it has no effect, or at least has no direct effect. It has no direct effect. But boy, does it have an important indirect effect. Let me show you. Yeah, there's no effect. A minimum that's below what you're paying already doesn't have a direct effect. But the effect is to change the relative price of skilled and unskilled workers. Knowing that if your price isn't all that much higher than a unskilled worker, then there'll be more demand for your labor services. Let me give you a hardcore example just so you can see how that works. Suppose that you're a business firm, you have a little factory or whatever, and you want to put a chain link fence around your grounds. How are you going to do it? You're not going to do it yourself. You're going to hire somebody to do it. And there are a couple of different ways to go. One is that you hire some unskilled workers with post hole diggers. You know what a post hole digger is? Now, come on, you admit it. And the reason you use it is to put your mailbox up, right? Yeah. Well, the unskilled worker, if he wants to put a fence in, it's going to take a lot of post holes. A post hole digger. You could do that. You hire unskilled workers. You have to hire a bunch of them to put posts and put up a fence. Okay, and you can figure out how much that costs, and you got to pay them minimum wage. Okay. Or you can hire a union man, a skilled driver that drives this contraption that's really fascinating. It's, as a technical name, is called a fence putter-inner. Have you ever seen them? I mean, when my son was 6 years old, we bought him these videos of heavy equipment where he was fascinated by them. And it showed people driving these things. You could put a fence in about as fast as you could drive, you know. You just drive along and it blump, 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 it's leaving a fence behind you. Just boop, 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 boop. Okay. Now that's a lot of machinery they have to pay for, and that the union is getting union scale, and he's pretty expensive too, but he gets the fence in, okay. Now which way do you want to go? Well, in one sense, you don't care, do you? You don't care. The fence is going to be the fence. It's going to get put in either way. The only question is, which is the cheapest? Which is the least expensive? And it may well be that if you can pay the market wage for the unskilled worker, that's the inexpensive way to do it. You hire those people, put in the fence. But if the minimum wage is raised to $7.25, well, hire the guy driving the fence putter in it. Okay? So that's what we mean. That's what the union understands very well. That if you essentially price the unskilled laborers out of the market, then you increase the demand for the alternative, which is the skilled workers. All right. So this particular logic, it lacks appeal in the sense that it seems like not the right thing to do, but at least it's economically sound. You understand how minimum wage works, so you understand why unions want a minimum wage, because they want to bolster the demand for their services, which will give them more money. And so let's see if we can get this effect here. Minimum wage rate has no direct effect, but skilled and unskilled labor can be substitute inputs, as in my example, which means that the imposition of a minimum wage shifts the demand for skilled labor rightward, causing both employment and the wage rate to rise. So watch that demand curve go. Okay. Now here, see, if this is the effect, then it's a double whammy gain, because you got more work to do and you get paid for more per hour. That's a gravy train right there. So income then, let's see if we can get the story here. Unambiguously, you don't have to worry about demand elasticities. Supply elasticity will affect the actual magnitude, but you get gains in both directions. So total income to the unskilled or to the skilled union workers goes from there to there. Okay? In effect, skilled labor, much of it unionized, gains substantially, while unskilled labor gains little or even suffers a net loss. All right? So this is one of the big reasons. And you know this, that with the Democratic Party, union people almost uniformly vote Democratic. And this is one of the reasons, because it's not they're trying to help the poor, they're not caring. They want to unemploy the poor. They price the poor out of the market so that they can earn more income. What the unions can cause by forcing employees to accept wages higher than the potential market rates is not inflation, but unemployment of part of the people anxious to get a job. So again, whether he makes these summary statements, that whether it's a union or whether it's legislation or whatever, it gets you unemployment. Telling question number 5, and I think these questions get a little more telling as we go along. Why is there no allowance for regional differences in the cost of living, so that a minimum wage income has the same purchasing power for northern workers as it does for southern workers? And a lot of government mandated numbers are indexed by the region, okay, but not the minimum wage. Minimum wage is set $7.25 in Alabama and $7.25 in Massachusetts. Same minimum, nominal minimum. Why is that? Has no one thought about that? Well, it's a very similar argument. It has just one little twist to it, but it's worth thinking about. Wouldn't regional minimum wages create a more level playing field? Not that I'm advocating regional minimum wages, okay? And here you get the same two diagrams, but now we've got southern labor on the right and northern labor on the left, okay? Again, northern labor is higher, partly because of the cost of living in the north, that you have to be willing to pay laborers more because their own costs are higher. And again, the minimum wage has no direct impact, but again, it prices the low-cost southern producers out of the market. Okay, one of the big lobbyists for minimum wage years back was the textile mills. When a lot of textile mills were going from the northeast to the south, precisely to take advantage of inexpensive labor in the south. But they made very effective competition to textile mills in the north. And so the solution is to impose some costs on those people down there so that the northern textile mills would be more profitable. And that's exactly what happens. So you get this same analysis. It parallels the skilled and unskilled, but with a twist. Okay, so you get an increased demand for labor in the north. Now here's the twist, and that is that in the case of just skilled and unskilled, you can't have people moving from one group to another, at least in a very timely way. In other words, you can't say, well, okay, I've been an unskilled worker, and now I've got the short end of the stick for that. I think I'll be a skilled worker. And then you go over and no. It doesn't quite work that way. It takes some time to develop some skills. But it doesn't take that much time to get from the south to the north. Okay. So, and in fact, it was in the 60s, when we had that big increase in the minimum wage, that you had a pretty massive migration of unemployed, low-skilled workers from the south heading to bigger cities in the north, because they could get unemployment up there, precisely because the minimum wage wasn't binding in the north. The market wage was already above that. So you got that mass migration, and that took the edge off of the effect. If you watch this, you look at the supply. Let me do it again so you know what to look for. We're looking for a supply adjustment, both sides. Okay, so I hit this, and you see there's a less supply in the south, and then more supply in the north. These are just people headed north. People in the south, they can't find a job. Minimum wage is killing them. They go north, they can find a job because the market wage is above the minimum to start with. So that takes the edge off the wage, but you still have the gain. You still have the gain of more people working and working for a higher wage. That gain, it's not just a happen so, is that if that gain were to be totally lost, people wouldn't move. You know, it moves into, or it's a gain that just doesn't quite compensate people for actually moving to the north. Okay, and you might ask, well, who is it that really stands behind this legislation in the sense that this is the effect? Anybody know any politicians up around Massachusetts who might be big proponents of the minimum wage? There he is. Okay, Mr. Minimum Wage. And think about that. Is he for the minimum wage because he cares about the poor? Lord, no. Okay? And he cares about voters from people who live in Massachusetts. Okay? And this is the way he can get more votes from people in Massachusetts. Does he know what devastating effects it has on Mississippi and Alabama and others? I'm not sure how to answer that question. I don't know what he knows or what he cares or doesn't care about outside of Massachusetts. But generally, you already see that at a national level, it gets wild applause, the minimum wage. Okay, and so it wouldn't have hurt Ted Kennedy's prospects for national office all the years that he campaigned for minimum wage. He could claim to be caring and all the rest. Okay, now is this my last telling question? Yeah, number 6. The law specifies a minimum in nominal terms. In other words, not in real terms. There's no automatic price level adjustment. It's not indexed to the price level, as lots of other things are. Social Security payments, lots of payments. Tax brackets are indexed to the CPI. So if it goes up, they go up. Okay? But not so the minimum wage. Minimum wage is raised in nominal terms, and then it falls as inflation proceeds. So why don't the legislated increase in minimum wage provide for automatic cost of living adjustments so that the minimum is specified in real terms and isn't eroded by inflation? Why doesn't that happen? We've got the answer. More red meat here. There's John Kerry. In 8 years since Congress mandated the last increase, inflation has wiped out any gains. He says the current minimum wage is lower in value, current in 2000, than at any time since 49 when Harry Truman was president. Now, he's right about some things. In 49, Harry Truman was president. There he is there. You see how long ago that was. You know, that's Harry Truman. And let's look at the minimum wage. He's actually right here, too. I need a little more space here to get this out to 2000. Because he was talking there in 2004, actually. And there is 2004. And let's go back 49. He had it right. Okay. So think about it. If the minimum wage increased automatically with inflation, it it would cease to be a political issue. It would just be raised, that's it, okay, we're through with it. So why isn't it set on the basis of real terms rather than nominal terms? Well, the answer is right before you. In fact, let's go back to here. Whoop, where am I going? That's the answer. That's the answer. In other words, if it's increased, it would cease to become a political issue. They don't want it to cease to be a political issue. They can't take credit and get votes out of some minimum that was adjusted 40 years ago and has been increasing ever since with inflation. Okay, it has to be an issue. It's a red meat issue every 4 years to increase the minimum wage. Right? So they want to keep it as a political issue. And here's where picture's worth 1,000 words. Okay, I think maybe let's see if I had. So when you see a scene like this, look at the whole story, including the analytics. But if you interview any of these people standing behind Bill Clinton now, and ask them what they think of the minimum wage, I mean, this will still be on their mind. They were there. It was great stuff. I'll end with this slide. This is Ludwig, who actually has a degree in economics. Did you know that? Can you believe how bad he would be at economics if he didn't have a degree in it? I mean, this is amazing. Ludwig's news, debate, opinion, and I'll put I think political bias ought to go in there too, media bias. And see, Ludwig says it this way. This is a direct quote. The question is, this is the question, can Congress put politics aside long enough to raise the minimum wage? Of course, it's all about politics. Now, let me just show you what are the premises that underlie Dobbs' question. Let me try to list them. You might think of some more. That the minimum wage should be raised, and everybody knows it. That the consequences are as advertised by its proponents. That political opposition can only stem from narrow private interests. That principal opposition reflects slavish adherence to ideology. That market-determined wage rates are indefensible. And that the basic supply and demand analysis has no bearing on the issue. Okay? You have to believe all of those things in order to ask the question, is Ludwig dead? And this group, I suspect, believes none of those things. Okay? So there's Linda Chavez. Then watch the sign. Raise the minimum wage. No. But you don't expect to see a poster like that anytime soon. Okay. Thank you very much. Was there a question? Thank you.
What's the great beginning amongst the economic profession?
Pardon?
Politicians is great, but what about the economics profession?
The economics profession generally believes that minimum wages are a bad thing. Although they were influenced by a couple of economists, Card and Kruger, of several years ago, who wrote an article in which they showed that they couldn't find evidence that suggests that minimum wage caused unemployment. I'll make two comments about that. One is from my colleague, who said that some economists specialize in not being able to find evidence of one's and also the evidence, as I said earlier, it doesn't show up in the unemployment statistics because these people are just down and out there with families and so on. So it was a very flawed study to start with. And I think the profession has sort of gotten over the Card and Kruger. The real question there is, why did the editor of that journal publish that paper? That was just professional malpractice as far as I was concerned. Anybody else? Yeah. I don't know of any persuasive studies. I know people have tried that sort of thing. But it's hard to do because you have to take into account people anticipate the increase in the minimum and avoid the rush, change the price early and so on. But there are lots of empirical studies. And the jury is in on that one, that the minimum wage causes the very problems that economists say. So it's not for lack of empirical evidence that we still have minimum wage. It's just the triumph of politics over economics that gets the job, and exploiting the economic ignorance. And I'm not faulting people for being economically ignorant. Everybody can't be an economist, okay, but exploiting the economic ignorance of the electorate. But that's a story told many times over in many other facets. Okay? Yes. That's true. That's true. I think there's something like 22 states have their own minimums. But it's also a parlor game about who qualifies and so on. But a lot of the minimums in the North and the East are above the national minimum. Alabama toyed with a minimum and it got shot down. Okay, it would be devastating for Alabama to have a minimum wage above the national, yeah.
California.
Yeah, yeah.
If state government was the economy effects, say there'd be any other.
Now what's the $1.50?
The $1.50 is the difference. $1.50 tax credit for
Well, it would, but it'd burden the taxpayers for the $1.50. So might not be such a good thing. Incidentally, about the state minimums, the Democratic Party typically uses increases in the state minimum wage as simply a way to get out the vote. So, in other words, you'll see most state minimums, when they go up, they'll go up in presidential election years. And it's just one way. If they put on the ballot an increase in the state minimum, then they're going to get all those people in favor of it, which is a lot of them, to come to the polls. And they'll vote for that and then vote for the Democratic candidate for president. So it's a get out the vote issue for a lot of those states. Okay, well, let's go do lunch.